Welcome back to my inner sanctum. I'm your hostess, Countess Elizabeth, mistress of the macabre, and today we'll take a break from the follies of man and focus our attention to the creatures of the night. I wanted to look more into the folklore of that which man fears the most, bringers of death. A true creature man would dare not allow to step in his path, or else he brings death upon himself. In Irish folklore, there is a spectre known as the Banshee. Let us investigate this ghastly harbinger of death, for its cries will surely bring upon your demise. So let us take a trip to the Emerald Isle as we explore our grotesque curiosity. Banshee is a supernatural being in Irish and Celtic folklore. I apologize if any of these words are mispronounced, for I've tried my best. The Banshee roams the countryside and can be heard wailing when she predicts a death. The word for Banshee comes from the Irish Banshee, which translates as Woman of the Fairy Mound. She can appear in a number of guises, as a young beautiful woman, a stately matron, or an ugly, frightening hag. She is usually dressed in a gray or white hooded cloak. While not always seen, her mourning cries can be heard, usually at night when someone is about to die. Those who claim to have seen her describe her long hair, which she runs a comb through, similar to tearing out hair in anguish. It is believed to many that she only appears to a select number of families in Ireland, namely the main Irish families, the O'Neills, the O'Connors, the O'Briens, the O'Gradys, and the Kavanaghs, although the list varies depending on who's telling the story. The origin of the Banshee is really quite ordinary compared to the tales that surround her. In medieval times, during funerals, a woman would take on the role of keener. Keeners sang sad songs called cuina, Irish word for crying, at the gravesite. There was good business to be made being a keener, as families would pay very well for a talented one. The best known ones always attended funerals of the biggest and most well-known people and were much sought after. As the more people mourning at a funeral, the greater the person was said to be. For the most powerful families, it was a common belief that the Banshee, or fairy woman, would come to keen at the grave, fairies presumably being more talented singers than any humans. The Irish phrase became anglicized to Banshee, and over time the stories developed and morphed into what we know today. The fact that the keeners were paid in alcohol and often ended up as elderly alcoholic women that were banished from towns and villages also adds to the myth. Originally, the Banshee appeared to people who were about to suffer a violent and painful death, such as murder. In later stories, she wailed outside the door at night, usually around the wooded areas close by, but was rarely seen. Cynics and realists who claimed this story to be nothing more than an old wives' tale said that the wails were actually just barn owls or vixens calling in the night. If you've ever heard either animal, they do sound remarkably similar to a woman screeching. The Banshee was usually described as an ugly, elderly woman dressed in white or gray with very long silver hair, and occasionally took the form of a crow, hare, or weasel, typical animals associated with witchcraft in Ireland. The Banshee comes in three possible guises depending on who you talk to or where the stories come from. More often than not, she is a crouching hag with a horrible wrinkly face, although other stories she is a beautiful, ethereal young woman or a stately, matronly type. In yet more stories, she is referred to as the ghost of a murdered woman or a woman who died in childbirth. Three typical guises of the Banshee may represent three aspects of the Celtic goddess of war and death: Baiva, Macha, and Morian. Sorry if those were mispronounced. In almost all cases, the Banshee has long silver hair, and she is sometimes seen brushing it with a comb. For this reason, some people would never pick a comb lying on the ground for fear of being taken away by fairies. She wears a gray hooded cloak, or white sheet, or grave robe of the dead, and her eyes are red from crying. Many believe that she can in fact take on any of the above forms and change from one to the other as she pleases. Her cries seem to be the subject of much debate in Leinster. It is said to be so shrill that it shatters glass. Further north in Tyrone, she sounds more like two boards being struck together, while in Kerry, her call is low, pleasant singing. Whatever she sounds like, everyone agrees that she can be heard from a great distance. Some report hearing her cries for several nights in a row before the death even occurred, while others say they heard it just once on the night of the death. Her cries rise and fall and last for at least a few minutes, varying in intensity. There have been alleged incidents when the Banshee cried for a person who was in perfect health, but was found dead within a week from some freak accident. The majority of her visits are paid at night, with a small few taking place around noon. The Banshee, or usually thought to have been a normal woman who enjoyed life, was incredibly beautiful and radiated happiness. But some great sorrow overcame her at some point in her life, and she became a haggard old woman. When the Banshee moved from place to place, witnesses have heard a fluttering sound similar to birds flying. When she disappeared, all that would be left was a cloud of mist. There were several purported Banshee chairs around Ireland, wedge-shaped rocks, where she would sit and cry for great misfortunes, if there was no death to be attended, that is. When a family emigrated, legend has it that the Banshee would follow, or if she didn't, she would stay at the family seat and lament their leaving there. The Banshee was relatively harmless. Apart from the dread people felt hearing her cry, the only other fearsome activities she seemed to get up with were knocking on doors or windows, which just sounds really creepy. There are also similar manifestations of the Banshee known as the Bean Nie, or washing woman, although this is more attributed to Scottish folklore than Irish. Instead of wailing and crying at night to warn someone of a death, she would instead wash the bloody clothes of the person about to meet their doom in a local watering source. Her appearance was generally thought to be the same, although she sometimes washed her own bloody clothes instead of someone else's. As well as warning families of an upcoming death, the Banshee also liked to cry at the crowning of a true king. One reported case of this happening was at the crowning of a legendary Brian Boru, who overthrew the O'Neills and began the O'Brien dynasty. Perhaps the only example of a human Banshee appearance was in 1437, when a woman purporting to be a seer approached King James I of Scotland and correctly predicted his murder. Well, that was truly a grotesque tale. Now you know if you hear a howling in the night, you know it could be a Banshee predicting your own doom. One good movie to check out for more on the Banshee would be the movie Darby O'Gill and the Little People by Disney. It shows this figure of doom. I recommend it. Thank you for watching the video. Subscribe, like, and share if you would like to keep exploring our grotesque curiosity. We will meet again in the darkness of the night.